My name is Madison Parker. I am the founder and CEO of Redwood Technologies, a fast-growing tech company that I built from the ground up. What began as a small startup in the heart of San Francisco has transformed into a global enterprise, impacting millions of lives with our cutting-edge products. Yet, despite the success and the praise from the outside world, something was terribly wrong inside the company. It wasn't until the winter of 2024 that I truly understood the depth of the rot that had seeped into my company's culture. I remember sitting in my corner office, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco skyline. I was staring at a series of reports, internal surveys, employee feedback forms, and countless complaints about management. At first, I thought it was just a small bump in the road, the usual complaints that come with any large organization. But as I read deeper, the nature of these reports began to sink in. There were consistent mentions of exhaustion, unreasonable work demands, and worst of all, fear. It sent a chill through me, not because I didn't believe it, but because I was coming face to face with something that had been lurking beneath the surface for too long. The once vibrant and collaborative atmosphere at Redwood Technologies had given way to a culture of fear, where employees felt threatened by their managers and even their peers. The complaints weren't just about long hours or missed holidays. They were about bullying, about emotional manipulation, and about a lack of respect that ran from the top to the very bottom of the company. The most troubling part was the fear of retaliation. Employees were terrified to speak out, to report misconduct, or to even offer suggestions for improvement. As I read through email exchanges, I could see the subtle tactics that many managers, like David Stone, the head of marketing, and Robert Miller, the CFO, had employed to create an environment where only conformity was tolerated. Those who spoke up about unethical practices, or simply had the courage to disagree, were quietly pushed out. I felt betrayed. Betrayed by my own creation. I had always believed that Redwood Technologies was a place that nurtured innovation, that valued its people. But the more I read, the more I realized that the very culture I had built was feeding into the worst kind of corporate environment, one that thrived on manipulation, fear, and control. For days, I wrestled with the idea of confronting the problem head-on. I knew I had to do something. But what? How could I expose the darkness within my own company without bringing it crashing down? And if I didn't act, how much longer would this toxic culture destroy the lives of the employees who were the heart of Redwood Technologies? I knew the answer. I had to understand the problem from the inside. I had to witness the reality for myself. So, I made a decision that seemed extreme at the time. But it was the only way. I would go undercover. Posing as a regular employee, I would experience firsthand the culture that had poisoned my company. I would be anonymous, blending in with the crowd, so I could see things as they truly were without the filter of my title and authority. With a sense of both excitement and dread, I called up the HR department and requested that I be placed in an intern position, under a completely new name, Samantha Green. No one knew this new identity. Not even my closest advisors. I would walk among the employees, sit in the open plan offices, and see how they really worked and interacted without the influence of my power. It felt like a betrayal, but I had no other choice. The first day was surreal. As I walked into the company dressed casually, blending in with the sea of interns, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and guilt. How would I be received? Would I be able to witness the truth? Or would I become just another anonymous worker lost in the daily grind? Immediately, I began to notice the tension. People didn't speak to each other freely. The chatter in the office felt mechanical, strained. The smiles were tight-lipped, and laughter was rare. The usual buzz of excitement in the open spaces of the office was now replaced by hushed tones and hurried footsteps. It didn't take long before I encountered Ava Johnson, a young woman who worked in operations. She was one of the few people who seemed genuinely friendly. We talked during lunch breaks. And it was clear she was brilliant at her job. Yet something was weighing her down. She didn't need to say much for me to see it, there was fear in her eyes. Just like the others. Ava had been working at Redwood for years. And her dedication was evident. But she was terrified. She was terrified of David Stone, the marketing head who made her feel like her contributions were never enough. No matter how hard she worked. It wasn't just the long hours she feared, it was the constant pressure to meet impossible targets and the cold silence whenever she made a mistake. She had become used to walking on eggshells. As the days went on, I spoke to others. Tyler Williams, a software developer who had once been a rising star at the company, now seemed disillusioned and distant. He shared how Robert Miller, the CFO, had manipulated performance reviews to make his team appear underperforming, even when they were working overtime to meet deadlines. Tyler's frustration was palpable. But what broke my heart was his resignation. He no longer believed change was possible. He had given up on Redwood. And that's exactly what the culture had done to him. It had worn him down to the point of submission. By the end of the week, I had seen enough. The realization hit me hard. It wasn't just poor management or bad leadership, it was a system built on emotional manipulation. On exploiting employees' desire to perform for the sake of the company's profits. I had allowed this to happen. I had unknowingly fostered an environment where people were afraid to speak up. Afraid to be themselves. And the worst part, I had never seen it coming. This wasn't just about bad policies or decisions. It was about the deep psychological toll this toxic culture had taken on the people who had once believed in Redwood's mission. These weren't just employees, they were human beings with lives, dreams, and ambitions. And I had failed them. The days following my undercover experience at Redwood Technologies were a blur of emotions: shame, guilt, and a sense of urgency that I couldn't shake. I had walked through the halls of my own company, observing the fear and exhaustion on the faces of my employees. And yet I had been blind to it for so long. Now that I had seen it firsthand, I could no longer ignore the truth. Redwood had become a toxic environment. A place where people were treated like cogs in a machine rather than individuals with their own lives and needs. I had been too focused on growth, on profits, on success, and I had lost sight of the very people who made that success possible. I couldn't stop thinking about Ava. Her quiet resilience. The way she kept pushing through each day despite the emotional weight she carried. Haunted me. I thought about Tyler, who had once been so passionate about his work. Now beaten down by a system that demanded more than he could give. And then there were others. The countless faces I passed every day in the office. All living under the constant strain of a culture that demanded perfection without compassion. I knew I couldn't let it go on. I had built this company. And it was my responsibility to fix it. But where to begin? I couldn't just walk into the boardroom and declare everything was going to change overnight. The fear had seeped so deeply into the culture that it wouldn't be easy to unravel. Every action I took, every decision I made, had to be carefully considered. If I acted too quickly, I risked pushing the company into further disarray. But if I waited too long, the damage could be irreversible. The first step was confronting the very people who had perpetuated this toxic culture, the ones who had allowed the manipulation and fear to thrive. I knew that David Stone and Robert Miller had been key players in this system. But I also knew I couldn't take them down without understanding why they had acted the way they had. Were they truly evil? Or were they simply products of a culture that rewarded ruthless ambition and fear-driven leadership? I called an emergency meeting with the executive team. I didn't want to confront them directly with accusations yet. I wanted to see how they would respond to my questions. How they would justify their actions, or fail to do so. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. And as I prepared for it, a sense of dread settled over me. I knew this would be a turning point. Not just for the company, but for me personally. As I walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room the next day, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. This was the space where I had made so many decisions that had led to the company's success. But now it felt different. It felt like the place where everything could fall apart. The executives, including David and Robert, were already seated around the table. They looked up as I entered, their faces neutral, as if they had no idea what was coming. I started the meeting with a simple question. One that seemed so obvious to me now but had never been asked in this way before: what kind of company do we want to be? David, with his usual confident tone, answered first. We're a company that aims for the top. We're about performance. We demand excellence from everyone. And we push hard to get there. His words were sharp, calculated, but they felt hollow to me now. But at what cost? I asked. Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped together. We've built this company into what it is by pushing for results. If we want to stay ahead, we can't afford to be soft. This is the way it has to be. I could feel the tension rise as I looked around the room. No one seemed to understand what I was driving at. They saw this as business as usual. But I couldn't accept that. Not anymore. I took a deep breath. I've seen how our culture has affected the employees. The fear, the exhaustion, the lack of trust, it's all right there in front of us. We've created a culture that sacrifices people for the sake of results. And it's not sustainable. People are afraid to speak up, to share their ideas. And that's not how we're going to move forward. For a moment, there was silence. David and Robert exchanged glances. But neither spoke. I could sense their defensiveness, their reluctance to acknowledge the flaws in their own leadership. But this was no longer about them, it was about the people who had been silenced, who had been treated as expendable. Finally, David spoke. But his tone was defensive. We've been successful. We've grown. If people are unhappy, it's because they're not cut out for this level of intensity. We can't coddle everyone. I felt my chest tighten. This was the heart of the issue. David saw his employees as tools to achieve success, not as human beings with their own needs and struggles. This was the culture of fear that had permeated every corner of Redwood Technologies, and it had been allowed to continue unchecked. I disagree, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. This isn't about coddling anyone. It's about building a company where people can thrive, where they can feel safe to fail, to grow, and to contribute without fear of retribution. We are in the business of innovation. And that requires trust. It requires empathy. There was a long pause as the room absorbed my words. Slowly, David and Robert's faces hardened. They weren't ready to hear this. They weren't ready to admit that they had been part of the problem. But I knew that I had to take a stand. If I didn't, Redwood Technologies would continue to crumble from within, and I would be no better than the leaders who had allowed it to happen. As I left the meeting, the weight of the conversation hung heavy on me. The road ahead would be long, and the battle would not be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. This was the moment I had been waiting for. It was time to rebuild. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, conversations, and decisions. I had set the wheels in motion. But the changes I envisioned for Redwood Technologies weren't going to happen overnight. It wasn't just about restructuring the company, it was about reshaping the very foundation on which we had built everything. Trust, empathy, and transparency had to become the pillars upon which Redwood stood. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Not only did I have to change the culture within the company, but I also had to confront my own role in creating the environment that had led us here. I began by meeting with individuals at every level of the company. I started with the employees who were most affected by the toxic culture, people like Ava and Tyler. I wanted to hear their stories, to understand their pain, and to validate their experiences. These weren't just employees, they were real people, with real lives, facing real struggles, and they had been silenced for too long. Ava, as always, was reserved in our meeting, but I could see the weariness in her eyes. I don't know if things can really change, she admitted. Her voice quiet. It feels like the system is too big. Too ingrained. I've been here for years. And I've seen it all, the pressure. The burnout. The sacrifices we're all expected to make. Can anything really change? Her question stung. I understood why she felt that way. But I couldn't let her give up. Ava. Change is hard. I know. But it starts with acknowledging the problem. And then it's about taking small steps to create something better. It starts with us, together. Tyler, on the other hand, had more hope in his voice. I've seen you lead. And I believe in what you're saying. We just need to know that we're not going to be thrown aside the moment we stop meeting the numbers. We need to feel like we matter. That was the truth. The fear that gripped Redwood's employees was rooted in their belief that they were nothing more than commodities. Interchangeable and disposable. I needed to rebuild that sense of worth. To show them that they were the heartbeat of the company. Not the figures on a spreadsheet. I continued my one-on-one meetings with people across departments. Hearing stories of burnout. Of talent that had been overlooked. Of ideas that had been stifled in the name of profit. Slowly, I began to see a pattern. The more we pushed for efficiency, the more we eroded the very thing that had made Redwood successful in the first place, the creativity and passion of our people. It was time to make changes that would impact every level of the company. I started by reforming the performance review process. Instead of focusing solely on numbers and targets, we began incorporating feedback on well-being, collaboration, and personal development. I also launched a series of workshops on leadership, aimed at teaching our managers how to lead with empathy, how to recognize and nurture potential instead of crushing it under the weight of expectation. But it wasn't enough to change policies on paper. I had to be the example. I had to show the company that I was serious about these changes. And that meant confronting my own behavior. The ways in which I had unknowingly perpetuated the very culture I was now trying to dismantle. I began with a public apology to the employees. Standing in front of a crowded auditorium. I spoke from the heart. "I've failed you," I said. My voice steady but emotional. "For too long. I've allowed a culture of fear and pressure to dictate how we work. And I've overlooked the human cost of that. But I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to rebuild Redwood Technologies into a place where every one of you feels valued. Where you can bring your best selves to work every day without fear of burnout or judgment." The room was silent as I spoke. But I could feel the shift in the energy. There was a sense of cautious hope. The kind of hope that comes when someone finally acknowledges the pain and struggles of others. I knew that it would take time for people to trust me. But this was a start. This was the beginning of something new. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Employees began speaking up more in meetings. Ideas were shared freely, without the fear of being shot down. There was a renewed sense of collaboration. A sense that we were all in this together. The old toxic culture hadn't disappeared overnight. But it was beginning to crumble. Piece by piece. As I sat in my office that evening, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had started this journey with so much uncertainty, so much fear of failure. But now, as I looked at the steps we had taken, I knew we were on the right path. The road ahead was still long, and there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Redwood Technologies wasn't just a company, it was a community. And together, we were building something stronger. Something more human. The changes we were making would take time, but they were worth it. This was a new beginning not just for Redwood, but for all of us. As the months passed, the transformation at Redwood Technologies became more tangible. The energy within the company shifted. Slowly but surely, the culture that had once been defined by competition and fear now began to be defined by collaboration and mutual respect. The shift didn't happen without its struggles. But it was clear we were on the right path. By the time we reached the end of that challenging year, I could see the lessons we had all learned, lessons that had not only changed the company but had shaped us as individuals. Ava, who had been skeptical at the start, was one of the first to speak up at a team meeting. The quiet, reserved woman who once doubted change now stood before us with newfound conviction. "I've been in this company longer than most of you," she began, her voice steady. "And for years, I worked without hope, just pushing through because I had no other choice. But now, it's different. It's not just about meeting goals anymore. It's about connecting with the people around you, understanding what drives them. It's about leading with empathy, not authority. I've learned that I'm not just a cog in the machine, I'm part of something bigger. And that makes all the difference." Her words were simple but profound. Ava had found her voice, not just as an employee, but as a leader in her own right. She had learned that change is possible, even in the most entrenched environments. But most importantly, she had realized that the true power of leadership lies not in dominance, but in compassion. Tyler, too, had grown throughout the year. His once hesitant and unsure nature had given way to someone more self-assured. During our final leadership workshop of the year, he shared his thoughts. "When we first started this journey, I was just hoping to survive. I thought the only way to make it in this world was to be tough, to hide my weaknesses, to just grind through it. But I've realized that the real strength comes from vulnerability. It comes from admitting when you're struggling and asking for help. It's about being part of a team that lifts each other up instead of tearing each other down. I've learned that success isn't just about the numbers, it's about the people you're with along the way." Tyler's lesson was one I could deeply relate to. So often, we think strength lies in being invincible, in never showing cracks. But the truth is, strength is in vulnerability, recognizing your humanity, and allowing others to see it too. Through that, we build trust and create meaningful connections. And then there was Lisa, the HR director who had been an integral part of the culture shift. She had worked tirelessly to implement the new systems and processes that prioritized employee well-being. At the end of a long day, she sat across from me in my office, looking exhausted but satisfied. "I used to think that my job was just to enforce the rules, to make sure everyone stayed compliant," she said. "But I've realized that my real job is to care about people, to support them, and to help them grow. When people feel valued, they do their best work. I've learned that leadership is about nurturing, not just managing." Lisa had come to understand that HR is not just about policies and procedures, but about people. It was about creating an environment where individuals felt seen and heard, where their growth mattered more than their output. Her transformation was a testament to the power of perspective and how changing your mindset can change your entire approach to work. Lastly, there was me. I had started this journey with a deep sense of uncertainty. I didn't know if the changes I was pushing for would actually take hold, if I could truly transform Redwood into the company I dreamed of. But through it all, I had learned something incredibly valuable. Leadership is not about having all the answers or being the person with the most power. It's about being willing to listen, to acknowledge your mistakes, and to show others the way forward. It's about being humble enough to know that the real leaders are the ones around you, the people who make up the collective heart of the organization. My lesson was simple. The greatest success of all is in creating an environment where others can thrive. When we put people first, everything else follows. A business is only as strong as its people, and a company's true success is measured by the lives it touches, the opportunities it creates, and the relationships it nurtures. As I looked around Redwood Technologies, I saw a different company, a place where people weren't just working to survive but thriving together. We had built something strong, something lasting. But more than that, we had learned something even more profound. The true power of a business lies not in its profits or its products, but in the people who make it all possible. And as we moved forward, we did so with the understanding that change is a constant. But so too is the importance of the human connection. This journey was only the beginning. And I knew that we would continue to grow both as a company and as individuals because we had learned the most important lesson of all, that we are in this together. And together, we are unstoppable.